And I will go ahead and put the slides up and we'll get started. Can everybody see the slides okay? Good. Perfect. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today for this webinar that will be on social media best practices in the creative sector. So we're going to be talking about specifically ways that you can be mindful of citing artists' work, but I would say that these best practices are pretty applicable across the board. So Where Arts Now? I'm Grace Carter. I serve as Associate Director of Community Impact at Arts Now, along with Nicole Mullet, who's our Executive Director. And Nicole, if you wouldn't mind helping me out with the letting people into the waiting room as they come in case I miss them. Thank you. But we serve as the backbone agency for arts and culture in Summit County. So we connect artists to each other and to other organizations outside of the arts and culture sector, identify and help connect artists and creative organizations with resources, and support the implementation of the Akron Summit Cultural Plan. And so, like I said, I'm Grace. I work here at Arts Now, but before I was with Arts Now, I've had a few different roles within the arts. I worked at Summit Art Space where I managed communications. A lot of my past positions have involved marketing and communications, which is how I ran into some of these issues and topics we'll be talking about today in my work. But my undergrad was in art history and pre-law from Kent, and then I went to the University of Akron for my master's in arts administration, which is also where I met Chloe. So I'm going to pass it over to her so she can go ahead and introduce herself, and then we'll have Jade introduce herself too.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chloe Redman. I am currently the Artistic Associate and Advanced Teams Coordinator for ArtSparks. Before that, I was the grant writing intern as well as marketing intern for the National Choreographic Center host with Ingazetta Hall, as well as a marketing intern with Canton Symphony. I have a BFA in dance and an MA in arts administration, both from the University of Akron. I'll be speaking to a little bit of copyright and fair use today. I'm not an intellectual property lawyer, but I have done a multitude of different research on this topic as it was my thesis topic in 2021. I'll pass it over to Jade.
Hi there, my name is Jade Houston. I'm the social media coordinator over at AMP Strategy. I've been with AMP Strategy for almost 2 years now. This was my job immediately out of college. I interned at Heart to Heart Leadership. I did a bit of their social. I like to say that AMP took me with a chance. I had 5 months of experience and a dream, and they let me in, and it's been exciting ever since. And I went to the University of Akron and got a bachelor's in communications with a focus in public relations.
Thank you both. So we're really excited to have all of you here today, and I want to thank Chloe and Jade again for being part of this workshop. They're both very smart women, so I'm excited to get to hear from them. But we'll be talking about a few different topics today. We're going to start by talking a little bit, very high level overview of copyright. Like Chloe said, we're not lawyers, but but we can give you an idea of what to pay attention to with regard to copyright and how it might affect an arts nonprofit. We'll talk about accessibility in social media, alt text, things like that. And then we'll talk about appropriately crediting artists on social media and give a checklist overview of things that you'll want to keep in mind for your different digital communication tools. And the reason why this came about is because we found at Arts Now in our organization that we wanted to make sure we were cleaning house and I guess able to maybe not be perfect, but do our best to make sure that we're appropriately crediting artists on social media, that we're appropriately ensuring that our platforms are accessible to all people who want to engage with it. And realizing that because things travel so fast with social media, that can tend to mean that sometimes without intending to do harm, harm can be done if, say, a piece of art is posted without the artist's permission, a photograph is reused. And I think a lot of us here have been in that small nonprofit setting where you might have just inherited a Dropbox folder full of images that were from before your tenure, and you might not be exactly sure where some of those materials came from. It's things that I think we're all used to running into. And so how can we work within that to just do our best and make sure that we're appropriately crediting the artists, and as an extension of that, stewarding those relationships that in a place like Akron are so important. So with that, I'll pass it over to Chloe. We're going to start by talking a little bit about copyright. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll go through them at the Q&A later. But we are going to have time for a Q&A at the end. So I'll pass it over to Chloe.
All right, so I'm just going to start off with the definition of fair use in the public domain. So the public domain are creative materials that are no longer protected by intellectual property laws. So this is such as copyright, trademark, or patent laws. So examples of this are King Kong, Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, older movies, books, and media adaptations. The United States Copyright Office defines fair use as a legal doctrine that promotes freedom of expression by permitting the unlicensed use of copyright protected works in certain circumstances. So there are 6 circumstances that the United States Copyright Office lists on their website. And these are teaching, criticism, commentary, research, scholarship, and news reporting. So when evaluating a piece of work, if it is eligible for fair use within your various organization, I would highly recommend taking a look at these 6 categories. Within those 6 categories, the United States Copyright Office has listed another 4 guiding questions to ask yourself. The first of those questions is, what is the purpose of the character of use? So is it being used for a commercial nature or nonprofit educational purposes? Lucky for most of us in this room, it would be towards a nonprofit educational purpose. But nonprofits still can make money off of what they do. So you definitely want to be careful that you're not trying to gain monetarily from somebody else's work. The second guiding question is the nature of the copyrighted work. Is it creative or imaginative, or is it factual? So that comes to like patents and trademarks. Is this a solid thing, or is it an idea? When it comes to the arts, it's a lot trickier. I work in dance, and so using pieces of dance is a lot different than using an image or a painting. Third is the amount and sustainability, the portion of the work that is used. So it's the quantity and the quality of the copyrighted material. So maybe you're using a copyrighted image, but it's really blurry and grainy. The original artist probably would not be very happy with you showing their work in that format. So that's something else you can get in trouble for. So you need to watch the way that you are using the work that is not your own, and treat it as such. And fourth is the effect on the use upon the potential market for the value of the copyrighted work. So is your use of the work going to harm the existing market for the original? So if Grace produced an amazing image and I started printing it on t-shirts and saying, oh, well, it's for a workshop, it's fine, it would harm Grace's revenue if she wanted to sell these on her own, because they could go get it for free from me. So those are all some guiding questions. Essentially, we want to make sure that regardless if it is our intention or not, that we are crediting who the work belongs to. Oftentimes, because we are working in the nonprofit sector, it is likely going to be fair use. But just because it is fair use doesn't mean that we should negate all of the proper avenues to go down. Even if we do not know who the work belongs to, it is important to do your research instead of just pulling something from Google. And if you can't cite the artist, at least cite where you got it from to continue promoting and protecting the work of artists.
Thank you, Chloe. Copyright is quite a beast of a topic, and Chloe took that on in her thesis for our program, specifically with dance. So thanks again for sharing on that. And I'm sure that's something we could have a whole nother entire series of workshops on, but we'll have time for some questions at the end so we can talk a little bit more. But we're going to move on to some best practices around accessibility. So I will pass it over to Jade.
Thank you. I've kind of been doing some of these own practices for myself for about 4 or 5 months now. So it's still a learning experience of how I can improve. But these are a few of the things that I've been able to take away. We're going to start with the best practices for alt text. I've inserted the Microsoft definition of what alternative text is. The importance of this is providing individuals who are visually impaired with proper context to images displayed. I have an example over here from NASA on X, formerly known as Twitter. And this is an image description that they had used for a GIF that they have posted, just a scientific visualization showing the shadowed moon. That's an example of good common practice with alt text. You don't have to start alt text off by saying photo of or image of, because it's already, everybody will already know that it is a photo or an image of something. That's something that I also learned. But also there's also platforms that have character limits. So it's some platforms like LinkedIn, for example, it's about 120 to 125 for your character limit. So you have to be as descriptive as possible, but also short enough for the visual user to see exactly what you mean. This is an example of alt text also. Bad, this is just, if it just says sign, that's not descriptive of what this sign is. But a good way is fish and chips takeaway sign. It's descriptive without being overly detailed. As mentioned, some platforms have a small character limit. So just trying to give off those important details for the visual. We also have the best practices for captions. You want to caption your videos, and this is just adding captions or subtitles to the videos that you create. This benefits those who suffer from a hearing impairment. And this is just a random social fact. A lot of individuals who are in a loud setting where they can't play a video out loud, they will most likely listen to a video, watch a video on mute. So subtitles are also very beneficial for someone who may be wanting to engage in your content, but unfortunately can't listen to it, but they can still view it if there's captions. Captions on your post, you want to avoid using all caps on posts. Sometimes this can be seen as an abbreviation for something, but if you are using an abbreviation, you can use all caps, but then in parentheses, you'll just want to put what that abbreviation means, because it can be difficult for a reader to understand what the context is. But for artists, cite the artist with their name of artwork and year created. You'll want to always put that in the caption. It doesn't need to go in the alt text portion. That's just for describing your art. And then using descriptive hashtags, you want to limit the use of abbreviations as mentioned, but if you are using them, as long as you have referred to what that abbreviation means, it's okay. You also want to capitalize the first letter of each word in a hashtag. This is known as camel case, which is a hashtag writing. This helps someone with a visual impairment. They're able to know what each word is when you capitalize the first letter. And then these are just the best practices for fonts. You'll want to choose accessible fonts. I have 6 here, which is Times New Roman, Verdana, Arial, Helvetica, Century Gothic, and Georgia. The ADA compliant fonts have a maximum of 12-point width or 16 pixels. Accessible fonts have good legibility, characteristics like width and thickness, which is what you can kind of see in all of these fonts. The lettering is really nicely spaced out and you're able to make out which each letter is. And then this is just kind of like covering all of those again with some other practices. When writing alt text, think of how you would describe the image to one with a vision impairment. This is also when it comes to artists, you'll want to also describe what that art is, whether it's clay or watercolor, you want to make that apparent in the alt text, and then you could go into that setting and subject. At one point, GIFs or GIFs, depending on how you say it, you really didn't want to post those because you couldn't add the alt text, but as times are changing, they are now acceptable, but you just always have to remind yourself to add that alt text in. You also want to limit your use of emojis. Putting a lot of emojis in between words can make it difficult to understand what is being conveyed. If someone needs the text heard, the emojis will be said out loud, which then can kind of make it difficult to make out what the context is of a caption. You can create easy to read hyperlinks and other fun facts. Social platforms like Facebook can automate your alt text, but it is best to write it yourself because you'll know more about the details and what Facebook can kind of make out of it. And then lastly, for artists, cite artists in the caption on social media.
Thank you, Jade. And one more question too for those of us that are using a platform like Hootsuite or Sprout Social. Those will give you the option to create alt text in there.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, so actually another fun social media fact, Sprout has changed their wording when you add the alt text. You just say add description to image. It now says add alt text, and it kind of reminds you at the bottom of like, oh, you have 4 images without alt text. So that's super important for me too, as I'm continuing to learn and to continue to remind myself to add it. Having that extra little reminder on Sprout telling me, don't forget to add your alt text is amazing. So yeah, platforms are definitely always changing that and ensuring that everybody can add that alt text.
Thank you, Jade. All right, so with that, now that we've talked a little bit about copyright, a little bit about accessibility, we're going to move on to just a simple checklist that you can use for yourself, your marketing team can use to make sure that you're hitting on everything that you will need. So generally, if you are using any type of work, and we're going to get into some examples in the slides of different artistic disciplines. So whether you're talking about visual arts, performing arts, so it could be a photo of a painting or a photo of a musician performing, include the artist's name and tag the artist so that they will see it on social media if they're on social media. Or if you're like me and just slowly receding off of the grid, maybe you're not on social media or the artist isn't, but at least put their name and the title of the work if the work has a title. And also if it's not your own image or one that somebody who is on your marketing team whose job it is to be taking those photos, if you've used a photographer to take the photo, make sure that you're adding their name, tagging them if they have an account on whatever platform that you're using, and make sure that you have permission from them to use the image. It's always better to check and make sure you're sure than to use it and to end up having somebody who's upset with you, for lack of a better term. So if you don't know where an image came from, or if you're not sure if you have permission to use it, always check. When in doubt, see if you can just use a different photo and include alt text, which Jade just went over. You can optionally add what the medium is, specifically for visual arts. So you can put if it's watercolor, mixed media, etc. the date that it was created. And I found that sometimes too, this is really helpful for adding context. If you're using, especially some of the images that Arts Now uses are from pre-COVID even. So if it's something that was happening in 2018, 2019, having the date on there can give people a little bit more context. And you can also add a link, unless it's Instagram, which I still think is ridiculous, but at least you can put links in stories now. But you can add a link to more information where people can click on it and go and find out more. So if you don't want to include all of this in a caption, especially because you're probably going to have character limits, you can link it back to your website where there might be a landing page with more info. And if you are out of characters, because that's one of the very common pitfalls of social media, unfortunately, you can reply to the post in a comment with any information that didn't fit. And I know as somebody who's a little bit of a perfectionist that might not always feel ideal. But again, the important thing is just having all the information there, like Chloe said, making sure that you are crediting the person whose work it is, just so that one, they feel like they're seen and they're credited and that you're respecting their work. And two, anybody who's engaging with it can then find the person who created it. So we will send this out. So again, don't worry about having to write any of this down or remember, but we'll go through some examples now. And this is one that I actually, so this all came about when I started this research project about 2 years ago when I started at Arts Now. And so I was also working at Summit Art Space at the time. So I had grabbed this from there. So I was doing that job where I was in communications while I was working on this. And so this is one example, and this is actually one where it's especially important because this artist has actually passed away. So getting permission to use images, that adds another layer to that. But in this case, his wife, Eva Kwong, is the one running this account. So we're tagging the account of the artist, adding their name, name of the piece. And this is one of those long form examples where maybe you're putting this in a website or a newsletter where you have lots of space. Say you didn't have all this space, you would want to make sure that you had the artist's name, title of the work. You don't have to put all of this in here if it's just for an Instagram post or something. Only if you wanted to, you can always link to that. But you want to tag them, and then you want to put artwork photography by Bradley Hart in this case, tag that artist, and then you can optionally link to more info. But I want to talk about the performing arts more specifically as well, because as Chloe knows with her thesis, it can be a little bit more complicated than visual art with citation. But most of the same rules would apply, or guidelines rather. So you want to name the artist. And in these cases, it is helpful, again, to give context. So you might want to say, like you could have even said Flaco Torres performing in Akron in whatever year this was, or performing at such and such festival, just to give as much information and be as clear as possible.
Will do a call for performance art in January 24th.
Oh, Peta, did you have a question?
Nope, I accidentally unmuted myself. I apologize.
That's okay. Tag the artist and then tag the photographer. And then same thing with dance, right? So we're dancer and choreographer Dominic Mordunson, tag him, tag the photographer or the videographer if it's a video. And again with theater, so we're naming the person who's in the photo. And in this case, there's a theater company, so we want to make sure that we're tagging them and addressing them as well. And then same thing applies if you got the photo from an entity rather than a person, photo courtesy of the Akron Civic Theater, and then tag them so that they see it. So really overall, the bottom line is just checking, double checking, making sure that you are naming and tagging everybody who is in a photo, making sure that you have the proper permission. And if there is a case where, because none of us are perfect and Arts Now is, we'll raise our hands and admit that we have not always been perfect. We make mistakes. That if you do have a scenario where something's posted and you have somebody who comes to you and says, hey, I noticed that this photo was posted where there's people posing in front of a mural that I did, and I didn't see my name anywhere on it. What's nice about things that are digital, the downfall to it is that it tends to be quick and fast, but the nice thing about it is that you can go back and change it. And so as long as you have a conversation with that person, make sure you say, hey, we're so sorry. Let me go back and change that for you, and just make sure that you're crediting that person as they want to be credited. That is what we would recommend in that type of situation. But I want to make sure that we have time for some Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and take the slides down so that we can all see each other. And then if anybody has a question, I think looks like PETA has her hand raised. So I'll throw it over to her if you had a question.
Yeah, I have a really quick question. So I understand the importance of always, giving credit where credit is due. I'm also curious what best practices, and maybe you mentioned this and I missed it, and I apologize if I did. So for example, for Akron Soul Train in particular, we do a call for art, and artists submit their artwork to the Artist in Residence program, and we specify in the application that we may use images for promotional purposes. And that is sort of our blanket way of saying, like, we may use these images for marketing in the future. And is that best practice, or is there another way we should be doing it so that we only would use obviously images by artists who were selected, not everybody who submits, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think that's a great example, and I think that that would be applicable to a lot of us in this room if you're doing any sort of a application process. And Nicole might be able to talk about or Kat how Arts Now handles that for some of our different grant programs. But I think that having that information up front is really useful. I know that one thing that I'll do for Summit Live 365, because there are artist profiles on there, is that whenever we're going to feature somebody for the upcoming month, they have the information like their bio and their photos on their profile. But usually what I'll do is try to reach out to that person and make sure, hey, is everything still up to date? Are you okay with using these photos? See what they say. Sometimes they're like, yeah, totally cool. Go ahead and use them. Sometimes they might have something that's updated. So that's my take. But I think maybe if Nicole or Kat want to talk about kind of collecting that information up front, and I think Arts Now handles that pretty similarly to Akron Soul Train.
Hi, Nicole. PETA, that's a great question. And you're saying you're only using from those who are selected for the program, I think is what you said.
Yeah, but I was also thinking, like, in terms of our members exhibition, we also have people that submit artwork to that, and we do utilize their artwork. And now that I'm saying this, I'm not sure if on that submission form, if we say, hey, by submitting this submission form, you're allowing us to use that image. I got to go back and look at that, actually.
If not that, I think that little disclaimer, I've started having people click yes or no to confirm I understand that, the images submitted may be used. But I think because you're only using the ones that are from those selected, whatever your grant agreement is or your agreement that you put, I would just include it in there, let them know how and if the images are going to be used. I feel like half the battle is being transparent with people. So if they're the folks who are already going to be part of the residency, then whatever that agreement is that you're putting in place, I'd probably put it in that. That's what we did with our grant agreements, and it seemed to be helpful.
That makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And Grace, I don't know if you saw, I had put in, would you mind at some point talking about just for tactical, sometimes anything we can do to make any part of this a little bit easier, or just something you can take one step towards doing something a little bit better. I wonder if you could talk about the app that you found for the iPad that I can't use because I don't know how to use Apple products, to talk about that.
Yeah, I think AMP actually found that app for us. I think isn't it called Easy Release? I think yes. But it was a paid app that that we downloaded. I think it was around $11, 11 or $12, but it's an app that you can use. You can have it on a phone, or we use an iPad, where it's basically a photo release where so if you've ever been out at an event before and somebody takes your photo and asks you to sign a form saying it's okay to use, that's what it is and what it's for. What's nice about that app, though, I'll put that in the email that I send out after. What's nice about it is that it gives you the option to actually take a photo of the person, or like you have them use the phone or the iPad to take a selfie, and then it'll remember their face so that then if you go back later and are trying to figure out who it is in the image, you have their name, and you know if you have their permission to use it or not. Generally, the rule that we go by, Nicole, I'm glad that you mentioned that because that's an important part of this too. Especially as somebody who does not like having their picture taken. So if you do have somebody then who says, no, I don't want to have my photo used, and they don't give you permission, then you just don't use that photo. But if you have somebody sign it, then they're saying you can use their likeness and you can reproduce that. But generally, the rule that we use is for if it's one person, 1 to 2 people, where they're very clearly identifiable in the photo, you probably want to try to get permission or get a release signed. If you're at a huge event, like say you're taking photos at like a art walk or a porch rocker where there's groups of people, it's a public event on a Friday or Saturday, there's that expectation that you're out in public, and so people might take your photo. Still, yeah, just same type of rules where it's just generally good to check with people. And then if you do have a case where somebody reaches out to you and is like, hey, you used a picture of me, and they're not okay with it, then you handle those situations as they arise. Maybe, you take that photo down, or you just agree, okay, we won't use it again in the future, or you ask them, well, if you are okay with us using your photo, would you sign a release? So it's just all about making sure that you have permission, that you're putting the people first over the image. Yeah. I think we have a few questions in the chat as well. We have one from Music Columbus. It says our organization just started using Hootsuite. If you're familiar with the software, what are some other ways we can use it to practice accessibility and crediting artists? So I think it's been a while since I've used Hootsuite, but I think I'll let Jade answer that one if it's okay to put you on the spot.
I was kind of replying to it in the chat a little bit, but I'm I'm not familiar too much with Hootsuite myself, but a good way to credit artists is also tagging them. So tagging them on the social platforms that they are on, so that way they are notified. And even if users also possibly want to see more of their work, they have the option to go click on their page and go check out some of their work. And even if that artist that's being tagged wants to share that post that you've posted as well, that's also a good idea.
Thanks, Jade. And then we have another question that it looks like Nicole replied to. I teach fine arts as a visual artist, and I would prefer that I be asked if I would like to share my artwork. Yes, absolutely. And it looks like Nicole had responded to that. Yeah, deleting everything that we don't have permission to use. And that, yes, so if you don't have permission to use something, but you find it floating around in your database, because like I mentioned, sometimes if you're at an organization and say you just started in a marketing role there and hey, here's our library of images. There might be other people that have access to it. Whoever is your successor might have access to it. And so if you find out after the fact, this is an image that we want to make sure we're not using anymore, just pull it out of there so that you don't repeat the same mistake. Okay, I think I'm finally caught up from the chat. So any other questions?
I have one. I'd be interested in other tips or tricks that some of you might be using where you've had success, little things that maybe reminders that you stick by your keyboard, a little mental checklist that you do, or platforms or technology that you found especially helpful. What are the tips and tricks either for accessibility purposes to make sure that, our friends using screen readers can access it, or making sure that we're crediting people appropriately or engaging with people appropriately? I'd be really interested in any of your how-tos and tips to make things a little bit easier.
I think for me with Sprout, that's one of the most helpful tips. And a lot of people will not have access to Sprout or use it, but also some of these social platforms too, like Facebook, there will be buttons that do say adding alt text. And it is it's been writing it down as my thing of like, don't forget to add the alt text, or it is that mental note. But something that I've kind of told myself to remind myself is there's going to be someone out there that takes that extra step to get the context of an image. So it's important for me to take that extra step is kind of how I look at it. So that's the reminder that I always give myself so I don't forget. But as Grace has also mentioned too during this presentation, that we are sometimes moving fast and it is often forgotten of like, oh my goodness, we were moving too fast. This was a fire. We got this posted, forgot to add these. And luckily we're in a digital age where these can be added again or altered or edited as needed.
Thanks, Jade. Any other questions? Nicole's clapping. Thanks, Nicole. And I'll also send out our emails, Chloe's email and Jade's email, and it'll come from me. So you'll have my email after the workshop. So if you have any follow-up questions or just want to reach out and chat about this or anything that your organization is running into, it's important to us, and it's something that we've seen come up again and again in our work over the years. But really at the core of it, we want to make sure that we are being good advocates for our artists and creative community. And also through workshops like these, equipping artists with the tools that they need as well to understand what their rights are and what they're entitled to and should be asking of organizations. So thank you so much, everybody, for attending today. I'll be sending out an email with the link to the recording as well as the slides and a resource packet where we'll have all the information we talked about copyright, accessibility. That checklist will be in there. And I'll also send out our upcoming events. That was the other thing that I wanted to say. So if you want to register for workshops in the future, we would love to have you back. But unless anybody else has any other questions or thoughts, I will set you all free to go enjoy your lunch. And we'll hope to see you at the next workshop.